Well, it's day two at the Summit for Democracy, and U.S. President Joe Biden is set to announce $690 million in funding to bolster democracies around the world. The funding aims to fight corruption and to support free and fair elections. It will also advance technologies that support democratic governments amid concerns over China and Russia. The Biden administration has been criticized for making little progress in advancing human rights democracy as a focus of its foreign policy. Rights advocates also accused countries taking part in the summit, such as India and Israel, of the lack of progress on improving their democracies. And for more on this, Nick Harper joins us live from Washington, D.C. Nick, it's now day two. What's happened so far? What is going to happen by the end of today?
Well, in the last couple of hours, we've heard from President Yoon of South Korea. He's been leading a session really focusing in on economic prosperity and how that relates to democracy. He said that South Korea was a freedom facilitator, and he hailed this summit as a landmark occasion, saying it was an opportunity to reinforce countries' efforts towards democracy. He highlighted various crises around the world that is threatening democracy. He talked about things like fake news, disinformation online, but also threats to the rule of law and to human rights. He said all of that threatened not only democracy, but also freedom. We also heard from two countries you mentioned just a moment ago, who have been questioned about their participation in this democracy summit, considering problems they're facing at home. So we heard from Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. Obviously, within the last week or so, we've had the expulsion of the opposition leader, Mr. Gandhi, from Parliament. But Mr. Modi spoke about the fact that India was not only the fastest growing global economy, but also that it was upholding democratic freedoms. And he spoke about the importance of people being able to choose elected leaders. And we also heard from the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister there. He's seen protests in the country as a result of his plans to reform the judicial system, critics saying that he's trying to overreach his own powers. He said he wanted to reassure governments who've expressed concern, and he said that his reform plan was a way of strengthening democracy. In the next couple of hours, we're going to be hearing from the US President Joe Biden announcing that $690 million plan, which will advance democracies around the globe. And particularly, that's going to be looking at technology, how to help bolster technology and stand up to what the US has called digital authoritarianism. A veiled swipe there at China and Russia and what the US says they're doing, promoting disinformation online.
Oh, Nick, despite that pledge of $690 million, you also mentioned, for example, Israel and India facing questions on what are they doing to advance their own democracies. Of course, the US also getting questions along the same line. We heard this in the first summit in 2021, as in you are invited, but how are you conducting your own democracies at home? So far, how has Washington responded to questions like these?
Yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, we've heard over the course of the last day and a bit how the US is doing a lot to advance democracies. The Biden administration, the White House, has been bombarding journalists' email inboxes with a whole fact list range of how in the last 15 months since the first summit, they've helped to promote democracy worldwide. The big problem, though, is really many of the things that they're talking about are not that tangible. It's not easy to say, well, look, the US has done X or Y to uphold democracy. And also another problem is that many of the countries who made commitments 15 months ago are not being held accountable. There's no mechanism to hold them accountable, to measure the progress that they're making. However, the US is committed to this. This summit isn't even over, but they've already said a third democracy summit will take place. South Korea is going to be at some point in the future hosting it.
Oh, thanks. Well, thanks for that. Nick Harper reporting live to us there from Washington, D.C.